started with the first presentation for today. I'm very happy to welcome Jasmine and Andreas Preslmayr from the City of Vienna Court of Audit. And you are going to take us through the steps of an audit project that you have completed and tell us all about it. Thanks very much for being here, and please start now.
Thank you. So, hello and welcome. To our presentation. The presentation is about our project, process mining project, especially the challenges of the audit with process mining. First of all, I want to give you a short introduction about our persons. I'm working since 2010 in the City of Vienna Court of Audit, and started 2015 with the creation of an internal proof of concept for the application of process mining in the audit work. My colleague, Ms. Jasmine and Andreas, started 2016 in the Vienna Court of Audit, and she is also very interesting in process mining, supports this in a very good manner, and was also the partner in this project and supports this team this team very well. Additional information is that our first application to get in contact with process mining was 2016 with an audit of the IT service management. So we started with some key facts about our institution. The City of Vienna Court of Audit is founded in the 1st of June 1920, was called the City of Vienna Audit Department. There was a change and on 1st of January 2014 with, we called it the City of Vienna Court of Audit. There are key facts of the Vienna Court of Audit about 92 staff members. From these 92 staff members, there are about 70 employees in the audit service itself. There are about 120 audit reports per year, and these audit reports are publicly available at the homepage to get information about these audits. There are two key tasks. We have the first key task, the main key task is the audit of financial operations. These are an audit task of the underlying financial volume of the municipal departments, enterprises and the investments, as well as the institutions which receive financial provisions from the City of Vienna. That's the main task. It's the usual main task of the audit departments and in Austria on the Court of Audits, but there is a uniqueness for our Court of Vienna. It's the main key task. It's the task of the audit of security and safety regulations. This part is the audit of these regulations at the municipalities in questions to the safety of human life or the safety of human health in accordance to the authority assignments, infrastructure and facilities. This uniqueness is one uniqueness of the Court of Audits and Departments of Austria, and this was due to the collapse of the major bridge crossing from the Danube River called Reichsbrücke on the 1st of August 1976. It was also a very remarkable day for this task, and also there was a second accident because there was an accident from a famous Austrian Formula One driver. So it's a very remarkable day of this audit task, which was founded in the Vienna Constitution. What we want to show about our process mining project. So we called the route and the sites of our audit with process mining, and we'll give you an overview with these few points and the stops of this audit, and give you a way and an insight what we have done. The way we want to show you this audit task is our audit procedure. We can see there, beginning with the usual audit planning, about audit preparation, the main task about conducting the audit, which includes the part of the process mining part, and so on. At last, the announcement of measurements for an audit procedure. It's a very conventional and proven way of conducting an audit, because we used the usual approach about the random samples. And in this way, we changed this way to perform an audit with a full population sample. And this is also the approach which we use the process mining part. So the main part with the part of the conducting the audits are several underlying key tasks to do. And these key tasks are, for example, beginning the audit concept, then the two parts, the collection of data and situational and deviation analysis, and go on with audit results, the audit trail and the audit file. Especially in to view the part of the process mining analysis are these two parts. It's the collection of the data and the situational and deviation analysis, which is called the data-driven audit approach with process mining. So these two parts contains underlying parts for process mining. And our first approach thought was that this is a relay run with a relay handover of these deliverables of the process mining. Beginning with the first deliverable is the data analysis concept, and so on goes to finally the last delivery. And we want to give you a step-by-step guide and through the deliverables, and give you an impression about what was done, what was the challenging part, and so on. So we start with the first deliverable. This was the data analysis concept. In this concept, the deliverable of the data analysis concept is also part of the overall audit concept, but this chapter gives a more detailed view about the expected or wanted needs of this data-driven approach with the use of process mining. So first of all, the information of the data analysis concept is which process we want to audit. So we want to choose the process of the purchase or the procurement to pay process. We think that's a classical process or field for process mining with a high opportunity to get the data in a sufficient quality and a sufficient characteristic. You remember Anne mentioned this in the keynote. That's the field for the process selection. So it's a good selection to get data in this quality and characteristic. This process, we think there are two core parts of this P2P process which we want to get the insight. The first part is the procurement processing part, and the second part is the invoice processing part with several underlying tasks that would be done in this process. Another key fact is that the time frame of the audit was especially for the audit procurements the year 2019. The next key information in the data analysis concept is who is the owner of the process and the organization. So the owner of the process are the Wiener Stadtwerke. It's one of the largest infrastructure or facility provider in Austria. There is a direct economic impact about 1.6 billion euros, also about 16,000 employees. And the owner of this process have also several underlying departments. For example, departments of the public transport. For example, with the key facts from 2018, with an underlying transported passenger volume about 970 millions, up to 970 millions. Parts of energy supply for gas, electricity, district heating, with a network about 18,900 kilometers. Also, two data centers, parking spaces, infrastructure, and also funeral services and cemeteries. So we want to audit this process in this institution, but we get a more detailed view, not only the B2P process in whole, only we want to audit the B2P process from the orders of the executive board. The next information about the data analysis concept is the information how we do that in the so-called IT framework for process mining. In this framework, we used our own IT infrastructure. This infrastructure was performed by a well-known procedure. It's called the ETL procedure. It's a procedure from data warehouse or business intelligence, where is an extraction part, a part of transformation, the needed data, and the load part, the analysis part for process mining. So in these three parts of this process, the transform and the load part are done by our infrastructure. First of all, we used a cloud service for transmitting the data and the information, especially in the format of CSV or Excel data file formats. The transformation part is done by the open source analytics platform Analytics, also with the format of CSV files, and also the Disco part for the process mining analysis. The extraction part is the part where we expected this shown infrastructure. We expected that the B2B system is currently an SAP system and uses also the possibility to get the data via CSV and Excel files to get the information. So we hope that this technical framework worked and get the relevant data with this expectation of the SAP system, SAP ERP system, and an executed workflow which is also installed in this SAP ERP system. The main last part of the data analysis concept was what do we want to investigate? So there are three parts we can do with process mining: the compliance part, the performance part, or the user experience part. So the first part, the compliance audit, covers the main issue of our task of our organization with underlying several main area themes, like the should-be comparison, completeness of processes, the classical fields of segregation of duties, 4S principle, and the internal control system. The next main part with what we can do with process mining is the performance audit, to get information about the lead time and also about the bottlenecks. We don't want to do an audit about the user experience. That wasn't the main focus. Yes, so this was the part of the data analysis concept, and in the next informations to the next delivery, I'll take the hand over to my colleague, to Mrs. Jasmine, and she will explain the next informations about the deliverables, the next deliverables.
So thank you, Andreas, and good afternoon from my side as well. I'm happy to take you through the other deliverables now and show you in each step what we did and what were our learnings throughout the way. So after we defined the primary audit objective in the data analysis concept, in the next step, we wanted to define the very concrete analysis questions. And doing this in a very early stage of our project helped us to get a good overview about what we want to address, and especially what data we need for this. So here we see an overview of our analysis questions, and as already mentioned, most of them were regarding compliance issues and only some of them regarding performance issues. The user experience was not addressed in our audit. So what we see here is that our audit questions don't really differ from questions we would ask in a project where we did not use process mining. So for example, the compliance questions, if the real processes fit the should process, is always something we focus on. But there have also been very concrete questions, like regarding the order releases, payment, checking and releasing of invoice, if certain procurement responsibilities have been met, and so on. And one very broad factor was also the internal control system, especially for I principle and segregation of duties, as this is always something we focus on when we do our financial audits. So this is a quite general overview of the analysis questions, and in the next step I want to show you how we made them more concrete in order to really make them measurable and get an overview about what data we need. So for this, I take one example. It's the question if all orders are released. And we see here on this table that we define specific points for each audit question. And first of all, the metric that shows us how can we measure this question in reality. So here with the questions if all orders are released, we thought we can measure this the best way when we look at the concrete documentation of the release steps in the IT system. So this was our metric here. Secondly, we defined the target value. So what do we want to achieve in order to say that this point is compliant from our point of view? And here we defined that all orders must be released, so 100% is the target value. Another point was the process scope. This shows us where in the process we need to look at. And for example, if we would take into account the question if the real processes fit the should process, of course, the process scope would be the general process overall. But here we can narrow it down to a very concrete process scope, namely just the documentation of the release steps in the system. The last point we defined for all our analysis questions are the influencing factors. These were simply those factors we thought we need to consider, first of all, when extracting the data, but then also in the end when interpreting the analysis results. So here, for example, we had as an influencing factor the value limits, because in a guideline, in a procurement guideline of the organization, it was defined that up from a specific value, a 4I principle is necessary. So we made this for all our audit questions, and so also got a very good understanding of what data we need in order to can answer them afterwards. So in the next step, after defining the analysis questions, it was time to focus on the process and the data model. And in this phase of our project, we wanted to really understand the process in detail and also the data that is generated. So what we did at the beginning is that we collected all the data we could get, all the information about the process itself. So for example, process descriptions, also procurement guidelines and other guidelines. We made interviews with the audited party and also performed the process walkthrough where we picked concrete cases and walked our way through them, also considering the IT systems. And we came to the conclusion that all those informations we have might be too specific and too detailed in order to make our project work. Because of course, the more detailed you get, the higher is the complexity in the end. So we needed a way in order to reduce the complexity here a bit. And we choose the approach to take our own reference process from a high-level perspective. So simply only pick those activities that from our point of view and for our analysis questions are the most essential activities we really need to consider in our process. So on this slide, we see the reference process we decided to work with. And in the next phase, we went through each of these activities and tried to find out what data is generated within those activities, where are those information stored, and can we get them out of the IT systems. We see here now, for those who are familiar with SAP, that our expectation from the beginning that SAP would be used for the procurement process was right. So we found a lot of information in SAP tables, but there was also an add-on used called the WMDX Suite Feeder that was used for all the release workflows. So we had a second data source we needed to take into consideration. What we see here as well is that some activities are now lighted in gray. Those were those activities where we, at this phase of the project, discovered that there is no data source we can use. So for example, when we sent the orders form to the supplier. This is done per email, so we simply don't have any log information in any IT system we can use. Also, for example, the incoming goods, they are not documented in this system. The organization simply didn't use this. So at this point, we realized that maybe we are not in a relay run as we thought. So we cannot simply work on one deliverable, finish it, move to the next one. But we had to choose a more circular approach and always include our learnings throughout the way in our recent deliverables. So here, for example, we went back to our analysis questions and reworked on them, because at the beginning we also had some questions regarding the checking of incoming goods, but due to a lack of data, we simply could not work with those questions with process mining. So when we finished this phase, we had a quite good overview of the process itself and also of the data that was generated and where it was stored. So we were ready to get to the next phase and to extract the raw data from the system. When we come back to our IT infrastructure from the beginning, we were now able to fill out the blind spots and really knew at this point that at our audited party, they use SAP, as already mentioned, and they also use the second data source, this XSuite feeder. So those were our basic data sources for our process mining project. We had no direct access to these data sources, so the Department of Internal Audit from the Wiener Stadtwerke helped us a lot here. They extracted the data for us and provided us those data files via an encrypted cloud storage, so we could work with those files later on. After the digging for the data, we had a nice set of raw data, but the problem now was that the informations were distributed over a lot of different data files. So we had those single data files, and in the next step, we needed to find the relationship between those files in order to get event logs and activity logs we can work with afterwards. So we tried to find the relationship between each individual data table and came up with a data model like we see here, where we found out how each tables are connected to each other. And by doing this, we also already found out what timestamps do we have within our data tables, what activities we can make out of those, where do we have a resource to use for. So we got a quite good overview about the data and also the activities we then used for process mining. So after having the raw data and simply understanding also the data connection, it was time to really make the data transformation work, so put it from theory to practice. And as already mentioned, we used NIME Analytics platform for this, so that's an open source software. And we made a data transformation workflow that should make our data relationships work in reality and provide us with data sets we can then import in Disco and do our analysis with. We expected this step to be quite the toughest one because we did not have that much experience with the SAP data structure, for example. And in our previous process mining project, we always had quite a lot of support in this phase of data extraction and transformation from the audited parties, respectively their IT providers. So here we came up with a transformation workflow and then of course had to validate the data. So we went back to the audited party, did some quality checking, also some checking with the productive system if our transformation workflow delivers the data in a way that we also find it in the productive system. And unsurprisingly, this was not the case in the beginning. So we had a lot of findings we needed to include and adaptations to make in our transformation workflow. and ended up with 17 different versions of our data transformation workflow. So we quite had a lot of rounds doing validation and checkings until we were confident enough to say that our data transformation workflow delivers us with data we can really rely on and we can work with later on. So what was challenging here was that, first of all, we did not have a direct access to the productive system. So this was then really time consuming because we were always dependent on our audited party. Of course, COVID-19 also was not helpful because on-site limits were possible quite limited. But from our point of view, it was really worth it doing the data transformation on ourselves because, first of all, of course, we learned a lot. And on the other hand, we now had for our audit documentation a very transparent and good documentation what we did with the data. So we really can see and make it transparent how we manipulated and transformed the data we work with. So this was really a benefit for us as well. So the data transformation workflow then delivered us a data set we could work with. So an event log we can work with in process mining. And at the beginning, we thought that we would look at the data from the order perspective. So our case ID would be the order number and the order position number. And we simply can analyze the data by looking at what way did all the individuals' orders go in reality. We then realized that there were quite a lot of orders with multiple invoices. And so we had our first challenges addressing those questions regarding invoice release, invoice checking, and so on, because we simply were not able to do this with the data set we had. So we decided to generate a second data set where we simply added the invoice number into the case ID. And now we're able to also look at the way the individual invoices from each order went in reality. So at the end, we had two different data sets for our analysis. So first of all, when then starting with the analysis, of course, we were interested in our discovered model. So what model we would look at. And we really expected a quite linear model, as we expected the purchase-to-pay process to be quite standardized. What we see here now is the process map we had looking from the order perspective at on all our data. And this was, of course, very complex. And the spaghetti diagram simply showed us that the process is not that linear as we thought, but really, really complex. And this was especially due to the fact that we had around 100 activities considered and about 1,000 different variations, because there was a high amount of unique variations, also due to the high amount of different activities we considered. So we needed to simply do some simplifications in order to reduce complexity, and we decided to use two different approaches. First of all, we started to go back a step higher and to come back to our high reference process and do a mapping with this reference process. So we went back to our essential activities and simply looked into our activities we had in the data set and tried to find again the connections, and then only include those activities in the analysis that are also part of our high-level reference process. For this, we used the DISCO filter, simply the attribute filter, where we picked each of those activities that were corresponding to our reference process and excluded the other activities at this stage in order to reduce complexity. The second approach we focused on was a clustering approach. So here we looked at the data and found out that we have some cases that were cancelled. We have some cases without an invoice, some with one invoice, and also quite a big portion of cases with multiple invoices. So we then decided to look at each of these clusters separately, and so again reduce the complexity. And by doing the combination of these two simplification strategies, we got nice process maps we could really work with. So we could do our cross-checking with the should process and also find deviations from the should process, certain strange process paths, and make our explorative analysis here. So this directly leads us to the analysis answer, so to the answers to our analysis questions. As already mentioned, we did the explorative analysis on the one hand, where we did the simplification, the filtering, the clustering, and then looked into more detail if there are any deviations from the should process and some strange process paths that might be worth looking at in more detail. And on the other hand, we did a targeted analysis where we used really concrete filters in order to answer our analysis questions regarding 4i principle, purchase order releases, and so on. For this step, I want to come back to the example of the beginning. So the analysis questions if all orders are released, and show you now in more detail how we use the filters in order to find the answer to this question. For doing this, we learned throughout our way that we had to include more influencing factors. So one of the influencing factors, of course, were the value limits. But as this is a bit complex, I won't go into detail on this now. But I will show you other influencing factors we came up with during our journey. So here, for example, we thought when doing the analysis that maybe if our target value is 100%, we need to exclude the cancellations at the beginning, because of course, if an order was cancelled, then we can tolerate that this order was not released. So what we did is that we started using a disco filter, again the attribute filter, and we excluded all the cancellations from our data set. In the next step, we tried to make it measurable if the order was really placed or if it was maybe still open, and thus there was an explanation that there was no release activity documented. As the sending of the order form to the supplier and also the incoming of good was not documented in any system and we could not use this information, we here choose another attribute, namely the recording of an invoice. So we stated here that we only want to include those orders where also an invoice came to the organization and analyze for those cases if they were all released. So the third filter we added on top was then if really the release activities were documented in the system. And again, we here used a third attribute filter, selected all the activities that show the release steps in the system, and simply forbid those to get as a result the amount of orders that were not released. So we worked our way through all of our analysis questions by doing filtering approaches like this example. And as we can go into detail for all of the questions, I just want to give you an overview about what questions we were able to answer at the end and where we still had our troubles. So we can see here that all the green dots are those questions we really were able to answer at the end. And those with the yellow dots were those where we had our problem. So when, for example, doing a should-be comparison, of course, we had our problems because we had to do those simplification steps, those clustering and mapping approaches in order to come to results. And here we were not at the end able, for example, to state the percentage of cases that really fit the should process. So this is where we put here a yellow dot, and we simply said from an auditor's point of view, we are not confident to really give a percentage, so a really concrete result, and simply had our problems with this. But we learned from our future audits that the more concrete you are with your analysis questions, of course, the more easier it is to really get a good result that can be verified and that has a high credibility. So after all the analysis, we come to the last phase. So what results do we get from our data analysis? And here we unfortunately can't go into detail due to legal reasons. The audit is closed already and discussed with our audited party, but our audit reports are confidential until they have been discussed in the Vienna Accounts Committee, and this will only happen at the end of this year. But when they were discussed in the audits, in the Vienna Audits Committee, the final report will be published on our website. So for everyone who is interested, just feel welcome to visit our website, look at the report, and Andreas and I will be happy to answer any questions back then if you want to discuss our audit findings. So I hope you got a good overview about what we did and how we worked our way through all those deliverables. And I'm now happy to hand back the word to Andreas, who will sum up for you our main findings and learnings throughout our journey.
So we will back to all of the parts of our audit procedure and give you a summary of these parts of the audit procedure and the sites. First of all, you see the deliveries of the process mining were delivered, were done. We have challenged, the challenge was finished, and get all the informations we faced in this approach. So what's the learning about these underlying parts, the deliveries of process mining? So first of all, we get a process mining procedure review, and this procedure reviews shows us some aspects of different validation lines. First of all, the validation lines in different levels. The lowest level is the line about to validate data in the lower triangle between the deliverables of the raw data, the data transformation, and the data sets. Remember that, for example, best shown was this huge variance of the NIME workflows to get the raw data in the right data sets. So this is the first validation line and was the challenging part, to get the right data with the right connections and for the right data sets. The next validation line is about between the deliverables of the process and data model and the discovered model, that you validate the process. Is the model equals the discovered information about the process? You remember this is the reducing the complexity from the spaghetti process results to a real shown and well-known process. We get the information. The next validation line is about to validate the measurements between the analysis questions and the analysis answers. Are the answers covers the questions we want to get? And the last validation line is the highest validation line to validate the results between the data analysis results and is discovered in the concept we want to audit. So this validation line shows us also that is not a really relay run we thought in the first approach. It's more a rolling review, and in summarized, it's I think we called it it's a roller coaster challenge. So it's an up and down of these validation lines, and it's a permanent review of these deliveries between these validation lines. The next one is what are the main challenges of these deliverables and the validation and the rolling reviews. First of all, the first main challenge was the data availability. In the second validation line, there are some analysis questions, and we want to answer them with the analysis answers, but it's a main aspect is their data availability. The second one is about the complexity. We get an ensured process and a data model, and could be this discovered in the model of the process mining analysis. The third one is the relationships between the data, the raw data, and the data in SAP. Very complex situation to get all relationships, and you remembered well shown in the 17 versions of the transformation workflows. The next one, Jasmine mentioned it, it's the access to the productive system. That wasn't possible also due to the COVID-19 situation. It was also a very challenging part. And the last one is, I mentioned this one, limited one-site visits, not only to the COVID situation, but only to the situation that a real life access to the system was not possible. The next review and learning is about the benefits to use process mining in this data-driven approach. The first benefit is that it's possible to analyze all business cases in the situational and deviation analysis. That's a different approach to the usual proven way of approaching with samples. So this is a really good benefit to get an insight about all the business cases. The second one is can we take targeted samples? So we get a special and detailed view about special samples of problems and discovered problems and findings to use these targeted samples. The next one is a little bit more about an upper view of the whole procedure parts in this way. It's the part of the audit trail and the evidence. So it's a well transparent documentation. We remember, like Jasmine mentioned, for example, also the NIME workflows. It's well documented, and we know what we have done with the data to transform it in a way to analyze it with process mining. And if we go up in the whole audit procedure, there are two more benefits. In the reporting part, the benefit is that we can provide with the process mining a graphical surface to better communication for the management level and the board of directors. And the last benefit we see, main benefit, is that in the part of the announcement of measure and the next audit to get the information how it was done with the reporting, is the follow-up can be easily performed because all the informations are now available. For example, which data we want to extract, how we can transform it by using the 17th versions of the transformation workflow, and also the filter recipes for Fluxicon. They are also available, and you can use this way to get a very easy and light way to get a new audit about this information. So that's the main aspects and main benefits and learnings about these things. Thank you for attention. Stay always healthy and feel free for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for this great overview and for a very concrete and comprehensive example that I'm sure will be really beneficial for many people in the community to see and to really be able to follow the steps throughout this project. So that has been really valuable. So thanks a lot for this very good presentation. We have time for two quick questions, and one thing I was wondering is you showed very nicely like how all the process analysis steps that you took, how they fit into your overall audit framework. And that's also a little bit related to what we discussed yesterday in the keynote, right? That you have to think about how does process mining fit into the way of working of the organization. And in your case, you had already the established audit framework where you showed in this presentation how, where, in which phases you did which process mining part. What I'm curious about is this original, the standard way of working, the overall audit framework that you have been using. Did you have to change anything there unexpectedly rather than fitting it in different places? Did you have to reverse the order, for example, for something in some place, or yes?
So from my point of view, it fitted quite good in our general audit procedure. So I don't think we had to make that much adaptations. But of course, compared to an audit where we use more common tools that we are more used to using, we had more loops back. So we often thought during conducting the audit, okay, we are near the finish line, but then something unexpected was found in the data that simply showed that the data quality isn't that good. We can't use this in a way to get good audit results, so we had to go back. But I think this all happened in the field work, so during really conducting the audit.
Right. So in the fieldwork phase, it was more iterative than it would usually have been, right? Okay. So yeah, maybe that's also a little bit related to a question that we got in the community. And by the way, if for those of you watching, you can also still add your questions in the general channel on Slack, and we will pick them up now or later in the discussion. And one question from Marcos is that he would like to know, did you discover any abnormalities outside the questions you have formulated in the analysis question step? And if yes, did they lead to any action?
We found a lot of things we didn't expect to. So maybe it was in this talk, it was a bit simplified that we had our analysis questions and we made the answer. So finding the analysis question, this was one point that always changed. So the analysis questions we saw at the slide, those were the very last version, but we reworked them very, very often, because especially in this phase of the explorative analysis, we made a lot of findings that was worth looking at. We, for example, made also some findings per accident that lead not to specific findings for the audit report, but for example, we discovered that some users at the Wiener Stadtwerke simply had other configurations on their laptops, for example. So this was something they could internally standardize, or some handling errors that were no real errors, but simply showed that maybe some users need a bit more help in order to make their own work easier. So those were one part we found out, but also some points where we really could make findings for our audit report.
I think it's also a very complex challenge because the process mining analysis and the tool gets so much information by simple clicking special filters, and get so much information that it's not so often too easy to get to concentrate of the few that want you to ask the special questions that you mentioned in the concept. And that's also a challenging part, because you click and take this filter and get also this information in a very easy way. So that the possibilities are so great with the process mining tool. That's a real challenging part to concentrate of the main aspects of the audit.
Yes, and you also mentioned this, and you showed even the spaghetti process that you've seen and how you simplified it and which simplification strategies you had to use, right, to get it to a manageable level somehow. And maybe that's a nice pointer also for the people who are participating in the process mining lab, because today the second process mining lab has started, which is exactly the spaghetti challenge, where you are faced with a very complex process map, data set and process, and the challenge is to simplify it, and so you can get into this hands-on challenge yourself in the lab channel in the camp community on Slack. So I would say let's go into the break right now. Please add further questions and discussion points you have in the Slack community. We will pick them up either offline or in the process mining cafe that will come up roughly half an hour from now. So 1:15 we will be back with Jasmine and Andreas and our third guest, who we will introduce then, to discuss more about process mining and audit, independently of a specific project, but just in general, and the overall challenges and approaches that are encountered in this field. So see you back again 15 minutes past the hour for the process mining cafe.